when you're really unplugged from this environment that you're so used to in your hometown and you restart somewhere with new people and new environment and new everything, it's kind of like an opportunity to start fresh. I've seen it in my own family, like it's amazing to see how we all show up differently when we're starting with new people, new people that don't know anything about you. They're not judging you. They're not holding you to some sort of persona or identity that you've had since you were a child. Transformative is definitely the right word that I would use for these experiences.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Digital nomadism is on the rise. And as we've mentioned in some previous episodes, services are growing up to make an international working life much more feasible, from international health insurance to companies that deal with the complexities of payroll around the world. These services are making it far easier to design a global and mobile working life. Today, I'm talking with Rehka Magon, one of the founders of Boundless Life. Boundless Life provides turnkey packages for families with school-age children to travel abroad, grow, and learn together. They've scattered schools around the planet that share the same curriculum and provide housing, co-working spaces, and community in a single package. In this episode, Rehka and I discuss how this digital nomadic infrastructure is growing up to compete with corporate jobs and potentially to support corporate jobs, how to choose the right location to work from, and what it takes to be truly location independent. We talk about the typical profile of digitally nomadic families, the transformation such families experience while working abroad, and other topics. All right, as always, be sure to subscribe to Work for Humans to show your support. And now, my conversation with Rehka Magon. Rehka Magon, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you, Dart.
So what we do on this show is we talk about the experience of work. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is something that the show has been exploring, which is we spoke with Ro Hannigan and we spoke with Liam Martin about digital nomadism. And what I learned from them is that there's an infrastructure that's being built out to support digital nomads. And that's super interesting because there are ways in which we get hooked on working for companies because we don't have that infrastructure. And it seems like it's almost like a competing offering for work that may or may not be corporate. And so you are the founder of Boundless Life. What is Boundless Life?
So Boundless Life is basically a complete living abroad experience for families that has education and community at the core. So basically what we do is we kind of provide this turnkey solution for families to be able to live abroad in another country for an extended period of time by providing them with fully furnished apartments, a co-working space so that they can work from there, an education solution for their children. So we basically build a micro school in every country that we launch in. So it's a kind of complete living abroad experience for families with kids.
What are some of the patterns you see in your clients? Because I'm sure there's a huge variety.
Sure. So initially, when we first launched, we launched, it'll be 2 years in February. So we're still fairly young. When we first launched, it was still the pandemic. And a lot of the families that were joining us as early adopters were initially world schoolers, families that had already pulled out of the traditional system and wanted a different lifestyle for their kids. But very quickly, we've grown and scaled quite fast. And now, we've grown to over 600 families, over 800 kids in and out of our cohort. And the makeup of those families, I'd say, are predominantly entrepreneurs, people who work for themselves, who can work remotely. We have a lot of tech workers, people who are working in tech and can work remotely. We have a wide range of people. We also have some nurse practitioners who now can work remotely. We have doctors who can do now telemedicine. So, with COVID came this freedom, if you will, of people being able to work from anywhere around the world. And what we realized is that what was holding them back, at least people with families, was that although they could now work from everywhere, there was no solution for children, right? What do they do with their kids? You really become locked into one location when you have kids for their entire education. So what we, wanted to do is really disrupt this way of living and offer families a new alternative that kind of provided everything they would need to make this solution a reality.
Do most of the people you work with travel with kids, or are some of them not traveling with kids?
No, our entire demographic has kids. We do get a lot of requests from seniors or from people who don't have kids who want to also join. Our biggest value proposition is the education program we're building. It makes most sense for our clients who are staying with us to have kids who they can send to our education center. Yeah, our model really does involve children.
So it's interesting because I speak about this as something that is a movement that competes with potentially with a more corporate kind of employment. It's really a lot more than that. It's competing with fixed location. It sounds like who are using your services are working for large companies. They may have an employment that is quite standard potentially, or they may not. I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurs too who are independent because they are carrying their company with them. Let's talk about what your mission is when you describe it.
Our mission, honestly, is to transform the way families live and to give them the freedom to be able to live anywhere they want and not be tethered to one specific location.
How do you arrange your schools? How do you decide on what their curriculum's going to be and structure them so that people can move in and out of them?
Yeah, great question. I think that's the trickiest part. We've studied a lot of the different progressive education models that are out there today. And what we knew we didn't want to do was we didn't want to make boundless, we call them boundless explorers or boundless students. We didn't want them to be guinea pigs to a brand new system. So when we did our research, what we realized is a lot of the progressive education concepts that we see in North America, be it in US or Canada, have already been implemented in Finland, in the Finnish education system for years. So what we decided to do is we partnered with a Finnish school development company. And with that, we are using the Finnish curriculum. It's actually a curriculum that is based on the Finnish model, but also incorporates a lot of the IB and a lot of the other curriculums, Montessori from around the world, and has built this new curriculum based off the Finnish system called the Nordic Baccalaureate. So we are using the Nordic Baccalaureate. And what we did is we used that as our base, and then we really kind of altered it and changed it to make it our own so that kids can easily plug in and out of our different destinations over a 3-month period. So what we do is we have different cohorts. So all of our locations, a cohort starts at the same day, no matter what location you're going to. And during the academic school year, a cohort is 3 months long. So our first cohort runs from September to November. The second one runs from January to March. And the third one runs from April to June. Now, all of those cohorts start and end on the same day so that everyone is entering on the same day. All of our kids basically do an assessment from the educator. So they'll assess them in math and in English, reading, writing, and based on how they're assessed within the first few days of school, the educators are doing a more individualized approach with each child and giving them the tools that they need to progress based on where they landed on their assessment. So our model is really based on personalization. We're a micro school with never have more than 60 kids at a location, spanning between the ages of 1 and 12. Our ratio of teacher to students are very high. We are using the Finnish model and providing a lot of individualized learning, project-based learning. We believe in making education relevant to this day and age, right? So rather than just teaching English, math, and science, which, yes, we believe are also important, we make sure that after kids have their mastery time in these academic subjects, they apply what they learned in mastery to a real world problem. So we do something called quests. So the quests are based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So each location is always working on the same SDG every cohort. What happens there is it allows kids to apply their learning to a real world problem, right? And that makes learning so much more purposeful, so much more relevant, and kind of keeps that love of learning in children alive because they're not just learning long division because they have to learn long division. They're learning it because they see how it can apply to solving a real world problem, which I think is really, really exciting to see it in practice.
Is there any other sort of synchronization of curriculum? What I think of is, for instance, in Mexico is incredibly synchronized. If you go into any classroom in any school in Mexico, they're on the same page of the math book on the same day. It's incredibly synchronized. That's, of course, not how the US works, but I'm wondering if there's sort of a sense of this 3 months for kids at this level, we're all going to be doing this concept in trigonometry.
Yeah. So what we do is the curriculum developers have created each cohort in each week covers a certain topic. So let's say in math, they're covering place value in week 1 and 2. Obviously, we have kids of different ages, right, who might be at different levels of place value. So that's where the assessment comes in, right? So they'll assess them in terms of place value. Where is this child? And then based on where they are placed in that assessment, each group of children will be working at their own level in that particular subject. So that's how we do differentiation, is what it's called in practice in the classroom.
When you talk about progressive education and you say that a lot of that has been tested in Europe, how would you characterize that? How would you characterize the Finnish model?
I mean, progressive education, the Finnish model, I think the biggest thing is, like I mentioned earlier, is personalization. This is one thing that always intrigued me, even just as a parent and as an educator or an ed tech entrepreneur, is any parent I've ever spoken to in the world. I would love to be contradicted on this, but I've yet to find a parent who's said differently, is that any household where parents have more than one child, it always intrigues me that in every household, two children that are born to the same parents are being brought up in the exact same environment, have the exact same resources. Those two children in the same house are always completely different. They're built differently. There's no two children that are the same, even within the same household. So it's always boggled my mind how our current education system groups children based on what year they were born in and teaches everyone the exact same way. If in the same household, two kids are so drastically different, I mean, education has to recognize that all kids are different, and having this one size fits all education system, it doesn't work. It's outdated. The biggest thing that I believe progressive education, and I think we would like to get even deeper into this, is personalization and really tailoring education to every child. So what we do already to start, for instance, is before a child even arrives to a Boundless location, we have our admission specialist get on a call with the parents and get on a call with the child themselves and build a 360 profile on this child. Asks a whole bunch of different questions on what motivates you, what type of books do you like to read, what do you do in your spare time. She even goes through a learning quiz with the child, which, based on how the child answers these questions, identifies what that child's particular learning style is, right? Like some kids are more, not kids, adults as well. Some of us are more of a visual learner. Some of us are more of an auditory learner. Some people learn more through movement. So really tailoring, understanding each child first, and then providing a more tailored and individualized approach to learning and education, to me, is the future of education everywhere. I strongly believe that that is the way we are moving towards personalization. And the way I see that happening as well is less big, massive schools, like industrialized schools, and more micro schools emerging with smaller groups of kids, more community based, more parental involvement, more one on one support. To me, progressive education really is kind of bulked into that. And then I would also say hands-on experiential learning, right? So rather than just learning everything from a textbook or from worksheet, really getting kids to work with their hands and build things, get out into the community, get out into the world, do more internships, do more field trips, go out there, see it with your own eyes and learn through experience. That is also part of progressive education. I think the days of just learning from a textbook to regurgitate and write a test and then basically forget everything the next day, at least That's how I went through school. I did amazing in school. I knew how to get 100 on the test, honestly, but I didn't retain anything after I got the 100, because I just knew how to answer an exam. And to me, that's not learning. That's just figuring out a system. That's hacking a system. I think learning really comes through experiences and individualization and collaboration, learning how to work with others. It's a completely different age with like just technology and AI and how everything is changing, and the skills that our kids need now are going to be drastically different than with the skills that were needed for this workforce.
So you have the schools, you have the co-working spaces, you have living spaces, and you have community. And I want to talk about each of those. We've spoken about schools, but each of those other ones. First of all, I know that one of your objectives is to get all of those within 10 minutes walking distance of each other, which I think is lovely. That just sounds really, really pleasant. What makes a great co-working space?
For us, what we've done is, like you mentioned, location, right? We're trying to recreate a lot of the aspects that you would find in a blue zone, allowing families to be able to walk everywhere that they need to go, to have a very tight community. So we make sure that our co-working spaces are within a 10-minute walk from everybody's apartment and from their dropping off their kids at the education center. We make sure that we have nice big open spaces so that people have space to spread out. We also have phone booths so people can do their meetings in private in a phone booth. Honestly, I think what makes an amazing co-working space so far, what we've experienced, is the community that we attract. I think the families that are attracted to Boundless or who have joined our cohorts in the past are so inspirational, are so have so much to offer and so much to teach one another. And I think what honestly makes the best part of a co-working space is seeing the collaboration or the conversations that happen amongst the parents in the co-working space. It is incredible to see how much knowledge sharing and helping and just inspiring conversations happen around those tables. We have a lot of kind of community driven activities that have organically sprouted out and end up happening at the co-working space. So for instance, I know in Cedos, Greece, this cohort, we had a family that hosted bourbon and business every week, just on their own, one of the Boundless families. And everyone would come together and they would have some bourbon and they would discuss business and they would teach each other. We had another family in another location that was very passionate about real estate, like basically a real estate mogul. And what he every week just decided to offer real estate workshops to all the families. So I think that co-sharing of knowledge that happens within our own boundless community, to me, is the magic of a co-working space. You can sit in a really fancy spot, but the magic happens when you're surrounded by other people that are like-minded and are willing to have these kind of brain dates and exchange knowledge with each other. So to me, that's really what makes a solid co-working space and the success that we've seen so far with that.
You've got the co-working space, you've got the school. Are those where you kindle the community or other platforms for kindling the community?
I mean, we have like our own platforms that we use that brings everyone together to like share, events that are happening or have conversations. But yeah, in terms of like physical locations, yeah, I would say the majority of family gatherings happen either at the education center when there's like a family event. We also have events from the education center that are like family and me, where the parents come in, the kids, and they do an activity together. So it either congregates at the education center, at the co-working space. And in some locations, we're also working on having a family lounge, because what we realize is a lot of locations right now that don't have a family lounge, the families end up congregating in the co-working space, like when they want to do a movie night or watch a, football game that's happening. And it's been beautiful to see the community come together. So in some locations now, we're developing out a family lounge. So it's like a separate kind of more of a hangout area for the families so that, if there are people who are working at the co-working space, they're not distracted by all the other families who are having a great time together at the co-working space. So I think that the plan in the future is to have all locations to have a full out family lounge as well.
Do families ever bond and start to travel from site to site together?
Yes, we've definitely seen that. What's so interesting about people is that when you've left your home, right, and you're Like, for instance, when I'm home, my mom lives 5 minutes away from me. My brother lives 10 minutes away from me. All my high school friends are close by. So you already have your like close knit circle that you hang out with on a regular basis. But when you join the Boundless cohort, you're everybody's starting on the exact same day. No one really knows each other initially. No one has that comfort circle of people around them. And it's incredible to see how fast deep bonds are made between the different families in this cohort. It's almost like because everyone's left their comfort zone and come to this new area and they're having these shared experiences of a new culture and living abroad together, it forges these really deep, meaningful relationships really quickly. This is exactly what we've witnessed is that by the end of 3 months, families, first of all, they're like, 3 months is not long enough. Like, I want to do this longer. And we're like, oh, well, no problem. You could just book another cohort and do it again. And they're like, no, 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 but I want to do it longer with this group of people. Like, I don't want it to be new people. I want it to be with the same friends that I've made here. So what happens now is we see a whole bunch of like 5 or 6 families who've really connected well. They're now moving in pockets together, right? So they're all planning their next cohort and a next destination so that their kids could be together, they could be together and continue the experience.
I can only imagine. I mean, I do know that some of our best friends are friends because, well, we call them the preschool friends, where our kids were friends and it turns out we as parents could be friends, but that stabilized in preschool and we didn't add very many more after that because we got insular, right? And we'd found it. My wife and I recently spent just 2 months on the road. One of those months was in Medellin, and we immediately became really good friends with a couple and their child who had moved down there to just set up house. They were from the United States, real estate people, and they were like, I guess I guess we just needed each other in a way that we wouldn't have if we just met in a cafe in our hometown where we already have everything we need. And we have really bonded. I mean, we're keeping track of them. Their son loves my wife because my wife is great with kids. I can totally see that. So how do you pick a location?
Great question. Initially, when we first started, and there was just kind of the 4 founders, what we did was we had this spreadsheet. One of our co founders, he's the CEO of the company, he used to work for Air Canada back in the day. So he had learned how to make these very extravagant Excel documents that rated like different destinations around the world. So we had kind of come up with I think it was almost 50 criteria of what a boundless location should have and rated different cities around the world. So I know top priorities were making sure that the weather was nice year round. We want to open a location that's feasible all year long. We wanted to make sure that it was close to a major airport. We wanted to make sure that we weren't in a major city, in a town that was less than 100,000 population, a town that was really rich in culture and experiences that are beyond what you would experience in North America. So we had this long, extensive list of criteria. Basically, the towns that fit those criteria, we would go and visit, and one of us would have to go and understand if this would work or not. That's kind of how we started. I remember going to our first location was Sintra, and I remember going to Sintra before and just kind of evaluating the town and trying to imagine families there. And now, we've kind of grown so quickly, so fast. And what we've realized is now it's not even just about us, right? It's about the families. It's about them deciding where they want us to go next. So as of very quickly after the first year of launching, after we launched the first 2 locations, I'd say, 2 or 3, then we started putting it out into our forum to all of our Boundless community. So we would shortlist basically 6 locations around the world that we think would be excellent Boundless locations. And then we would have the families in our community vote and decide where it is that they wanted us to open our next location. And we realized it takes a lot of investment, takes a lot of time, a lot of capital to go into a new country and set up shop there. So we also wanted to make sure that we were opening in locations that people were ready to spend money and stay at. So right now, the top locations for 2024 that we recently announced was completely chosen by our parents, by our families in the Boundless community. We're now working simultaneously on 3 locations for 2024. The ones that were voted were Montenegro, Spain, and Costa Rica. It's kind of fun actually because now we actually have a community to gear where we go next.
I want to say where you are now, which is you're in Sintra, Portugal, Syros, Greece, Tuscany, Italy. I want to go there. I have to have more kids. Bali, Indonesia. And so that's where you are now. And I saw that you had some teacher positions open, some educator positions open in Montenegro. Sent them to my wife, who's, you really want her to work for you.
Amazing. Tell her to apply. That would be lovely.
What percentage of your clientele is from North America?
I would say a majority comes from North America. Our biggest clients are definitely from the USA and Canada. We now have a lot of families also coming from, not a lot, but I would say more families coming from different countries, such as Mexico, Poland. We've had families from Italy, from Israel. So we're kind of branching out. A lot of families from other countries are also finding us as well. But I would say the biggest demographic comes from the US and Canada.
One of the things that people want from work, which I think extends to this, is some people want to be transformed. They're seeking transformation from a learning environment or from a work environment. And I'm wondering if you see that. Do you get to observe people long enough to see if they are changed by these experiences?
Absolutely. We do an event at the beginning of each cohort and at the end of each cohort. It's called Boundless Connection. So all the parents come to the co-working space and we kind of just lead a conversation on why did you decide to join Boundless? Why are you embarking on this journey? What are you looking forward to? And then we do a similar one at the end of the cohort where all the parents share, what their takeaways are and their experience has been. I don't think I've attended a single Boundless Connection that hasn't resulted in full on tears from like all the parents that are sitting at the table. It actually becomes a very emotional event that we hold because exactly what you said, there is so much transformation that happens, not only in the mother, the father, and the children, but even as a family unit. Like families become a lot closer through these experiences because they're having these shared experiences together. They're evolving. So many people become even physically transformed. We have people who have like lost a ton of weight or become very fit, like just in this new lifestyle of walking everywhere instead of taking a car, like we're used to in North America. And, within the community, it's funny. I think it started in Sintra. There was like, somebody found a paddle court. Paddle is really big in Europe. And all of a sudden they had like weekly paddle tournaments between all the families. And it became like the sport of the Boundless sport was paddle. And that's kind of translated into all of our other destinations where all these families are constantly playing paddle or doing CrossFit training together. And it's almost like it gives I've heard on this connection tables and in feedback is that it almost gives people like a rebirth in how they're living their lives and how they're showing up for their significant others and for their children. Because like we said, right, when you're really unplugged from this environment that you're so used to in your hometown and you restart somewhere with new people and new environment and new everything, it's kind of like an opportunity to start fresh, if you want. I've seen it in my own family, like it's amazing to see how we all show up differently when we're starting a new cohort and starting with new people, new people that don't know anything about you. They're not judging you. They're not holding you to some sort of persona or identity that you've had since you were a child. And I think that's so liberating to have this opportunity for a fresh new start with new people and a new environment. And even for your kids, transformative is definitely the right word that I would use for these experiences. You nailed it.
Let's talk about the ecosystem around your ecosystem. The things that make it possible for people to do this that are above and beyond what you provide. And it's partially because we are exploring this idea of what it takes to be independent from location, independent from corporation in some cases, or company. And so one of those things is visas, and one of those things is healthcare. And so I assume you've picked locations that one of your criteria is that they are visa friendly, that they're going to let people be there for 3 months. They're going to let them work earn an income, things like that. Are you seeing countries start to adapt their visa policy for digital nomads?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the digital nomad visas are, whew, they're like coming out of everywhere, in so many different countries. So definitely countries are evolving to allow more digital nomads to come into their countries. We definitely do are now selecting our locations so that families can plug in and out of different boundless destinations in order to facilitate visas. So for instance, like a lot of North Americans can stay in Europe for 3 months, which is great because our cohorts are 3 months. But when a family loves our solution and wants to stay in Europe for 9 months, it's trickier, right? If it's all in the Schengen area. So this year, 2023, we really made it a point to focus on non-Schengen locations. So that's the reason we ventured out and opened in Bali so that people can plug out of the Schengen, spend 3 months in Bali, and then return. Montenegro, same concept. It's outside the Schengen area. Costa Rica as well. We really try to balance it out so that families can easily plug in and out. We don't take responsibility for getting people visas or advising on visas. Initially thought we would do that as well. And then we realized that there's too much. There's only so much we can really offer. We want to make sure that what we're offering is high quality. We don't offer any recommendations on visas. We do can kind of direct you or a family to a particular lawyer to help you, with visa information if needed, but we don't take responsibility for visas. But for all the destinations that we're in, it is fairly easy to come in and out, like we've all done it. We can definitely give advice or share knowledge. In terms of health insurance, we do have a partnership with Safety Wings. So Safety Wings is a global insurance company. So we recommend that our families contact them and get, one of our discounts with Safety Wings so that they can get health insurance with us.
I like that. So there's in your ecosystem, there's experts in visa law, which then becomes this independent service. And it's probably by location because visas are probably so location specific, but there could potentially be a service there, which is just visas that people can go to go any place in the world. It also sounds like there's like a visa strategy that you need to come up with, which is how am I going to keep moving and stay ahead of visa restrictions? That's an interesting play. Healthcare, there's Safety Wing. And I hope to get them on the show at some point because I think that's a super, especially for North America, for the United States. And taxes can be the other tricky thing. And obviously that's something that is so crazy complex country to country that it would be hard. You can't do that. But is that also something that people find is a challenge?
I don't know if I can answer that properly. We've never had to give any taxation advice. I think that's way beyond our scope. Families typically have never brought that up really to us, beyond my scope to answer.
Yeah. I mean, a part of the way you'd know is that in the communities, everybody's talking about it, right? Everybody's saying, how are you getting healthcare? How are you getting healthcare? I'm getting it this way. And if nobody's in the communities are talking about taxes, it doesn't seem to be a problem. It's a problem for companies because companies have tax liability if their employees are working in different countries for too long. It depends on the country, I think. How about corporate partners? Has any company stepped forward to say, we'd like to work with you for the people who work in our company?
That's something I think we've always wanted to explore, like going the B2B route. I think there's definitely a lot of potential to contact HR in companies and encourage them to offer this as a perk. I think it's a wonderful perk for companies. In all honesty, we haven't dedicated any time towards that yet. Right now, we are almost sold out at all locations. So I think that will come in the future when we have the bandwidth and enough properties to be able to support a larger organization.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out a challenge to listeners in various companies thinking about this, but it's going to be a quiet challenge because we don't want too much demand that you can't handle. But some company is going to say, look, we don't support this 100%, but we will defray the cost. Like we'll give you a discounted version of this. And the company that does that is going to get a lot of really good PR.
I agree.
A lot of people would be encouraged to go to a company like that, even if they never used it, because it's not the cost that's the only thing that constrains you. It's lots of emotional things and taking the first step out the door. And it's, but just the idea that you would be free to do that in a company, I think would be fantastic.
I agree. I agree fully. Not only like I think that's one avenue, absolutely, like offering it as a perk for families to be able to work remotely. But even like companies that are already fully remote, like ourselves, for instance, the majority of our global team is remote and we don't really have, the opportunity to be together. Just last month was the first time that we brought our team together in Montenegro to collaborate and like work together. And it was so powerful to like all of us be in the same room, even just the management team. So I think there's so much potential for companies that are already fully remote to host like retreats for their for their remote employees to bring them all together to a boundless location, to actually work together as an organization. I think that's also a really wonderful opportunity to bring your team together. And yeah, I think this would be a massive perk for corporations and definitely an avenue that we will be exploring in the near future.
I predict that companies are going to form among your families and that those companies are going to be completely mobile. That's my prediction.
Interesting.
They're all talking about how they can work together. Some of them are assembling service offerings together already. I guarantee it. And I know that because I've worked in co-working spaces for a long time. And one of the things that happens in co-working spaces is that people start to connect and they say, oh, you do web design? Well, I do branding. So then they form a collaboration to provide a shared service or whatever that is.
I mean, with the caliber of families that come, I would say it would be some very successful businesses because the quality of conversations that happen at the co-working space are incredible. That's a great prediction. Excited to see how that rolls out.
How did you arrive at doing this?
Long story, actually. I mean, I started off my career as an accountant. So I did my CA. I was recruited at KPMG very early, like in my first year of university. Worked for them for the summers, had a job ready, lined up for me. Very secure, paid well. But I knew inside, like my heart, that I was just never really fulfilled at the end of the day. Like I would go to bed every night just wondering, how did I really contribute to the world? Like, what did I do that made a difference? So I felt, I think, slightly like knew I wasn't where I was meant to be, if that makes sense, but didn't know what else to do. So just, kept going with it. When I was pregnant with our first child, actually, I was put on extremely strict bed rest. So for 5 months, I basically had to lay on an incline with my legs higher than my torso. And I wasn't allowed to move at all. I wasn't allowed to sit up to even eat a meal. I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom, nothing. Like I had to stay in this position for 5 months straight. And I mean, I think I watched Netflix for the first day and I was like, okay, get this TV out of here. Like I can't do this anymore. My brother and my husband are business partners. They were tech guys back then. And they found me this like laptop stand that basically hung from the ceiling. So here I was for 5 months on bed, not moving anywhere, with a laptop over my head, and had a lot of time to think and reflect on what I really wanted to do with my life. And when I was a kid, I was kind of grown up in this. My parents are immigrants. My mom was from Africa, my dad was from India, and they made it a point to really immerse me in this lifestyle that revolved around mindfulness, community service, giving back, and travel. So we used to travel a lot, used to go to all these meditation retreats. We used to serve and like help communities and stuff like that. And I knew, like laying in bed, here I am being a first time mom. I had no idea what I'm going to do. Like I, didn't have this natural motherly instinct in me. And you start reflecting, you're like, okay, well, what do I want for this little kid inside me? And I knew instinctively that I wanted a very similar lifestyle for my kids because I knew how beneficial it was for me. I had a really great upbringing. Like I was very successful from a young age, whether it was being like student class president or public speaking, I don't know, finalist or valedictorian, like all these things came really naturally to me. And I knew it wasn't because of like how smart I was or anything like that. I really knew intuitively it was because of the upbringing I had of travel and community service and social and emotional learning, mindfulness. So when I was on bed rest, I started my first company. It was a mindfulness company. So this was before Headspace and Calm were, as big as they were. And I was really passionate about bringing mindfulness into the traditional school system. Was doing really well with that company. I won like Canada's 9th Innovation EdTech Award and was planning to take it pretty far. And then my son entered kindergarten. And very quickly, I realized that everything was going great. I just realized nothing had changed since I was in kindergarten. Like it was the exact same school system from 30, 40, 100 years ago. I think it just became really blatant to me that I was going to make an impact by bringing mindfulness into the traditional system. And now that my own son had come into the traditional system, I realized that education needed a complete revamp, like from the ground up. Like it needed to be kind of turned upside down and try something completely new. So I pulled my son out of school. I did a deep dive into homeschooling. I ended up testing every curriculum that was out there. My daughter, who was younger, then saw like what my son was doing, and she was registered for school, but she was like, no, 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 I don't want to do any of that. I want to do what this guy is doing. So both became my petri dish, and I was homeschooling them. I was developing homeschool curriculums. I helped launch a learning center in Montreal. And then my now business partner, he was actually one of the mentors in the accelerator program that I was doing for my company. And so he had kind of was putting this little team together, and he approached me and he's like, hey, like, I've been following you and you're already kind of living the lifestyle of this new company that I have in mind. It's called Boundless Life. And I would love for you to join us, and let's, build, if you could build the education model, and let's build this out. And I mean, honestly, Dart, it was a no-brainer for me because it aligned at the point that came into my life. It was the concept of I was already living the lifestyle. Everything that I had kind of done up until that moment felt like it was leading me up for this particular mission. All the experiences that I have, it really felt like it was grooming me to bring this, what I believe is like, I believe the boundless lifestyle has an energy of its own that the world needs, families want. And the way I look at it is I'm just serving. I'm trying to bring this energy to the world. I think it's not just my family that needs it, but I think hundreds and thousands of families will benefit from this type of lifestyle, this type of education model. So yeah, that's my story. That's how it kind of all came to life, and never looked back, never regretted a single moment.
You had a chance to go to all of your different locations?
Yeah, so my family and I have been living on location since we launched. We still come home, like we still have our home, and we're based out of Montreal, Canada. So we come home in the summer and for Christmas, but for the majority of the time we are on location. We've lived in all locations so far, and off to Bali at the end of the month.
And are your kids sort of like boundless badasses because they're like, yeah, we've been doing this for, our whole lives. These kids come in, they're just arrived. They haven't done this before.
They're pretty cool. They're humble. They've been around for a while. They're really welcoming. So I think they take their role seriously, and they make sure that, everyone who comes in feels welcomed, and tries to ease some kids who might be a little nervous on the first day. They're really good at trying to make everyone feel comfortable. So I appreciate that about them. And they're such good sports. Like they go with the flow, and it's cool to see the impact it has on your own kids, I think, because what I've learned in this journey is that I think kids are actually way more adaptable than adults are. And when you give them the environment to further develop that ability to be agile and adapt and shift when needed, it becomes just second nature to them. They've become so adaptable and so agile. Like even now, like when we come back from a trip or we go on a new trip, like my husband and I are usually like, oh, we're tired, and they're just like, all right, what are we doing next? Like what's next on the agenda? They're so resilient. And I think that's something that we almost rob kids of by tethering them to one location and one area. And it's something that they have to unlearn down the road, seeing them flourish. And it's cool, like I think a lot of the kids in the Boundless community with this type of environment, they're able to like communicate differently, like they can talk. Sometimes I watch them and I laugh, like they can sit with the old lady across the street who's 75 years old and have, an hour conversation with her, or they can play with my niece who's 2 years old, and like almost age becomes irrelevant to them. Age, color, race, language, they just develop this ability to connect and bond with people of all different ages and races and languages. To me, I think that's what all kids, deserve, that ability to see the similarities between people rather than immediately see the differences, and I think that's something that's really powerful in building this next generation of leaders. I think that with this type of lifestyle, this type of education, you're really molding kids to be able to sit across any boardroom in any country and feel very confident on who they're talking to and be able to negotiate any deal because everything just becomes one to them. It's kind of this like element of oneness, like, oh, I can connect and bond and do business with anybody in the world.
I just met with Charlie Ferguson, who's somebody who works for GP, which used to be called Globalization Partners. It so happens that that's a company that helps other companies do payroll and locate people in different parts of the world. But he himself is a crazy global citizen. Like he's never, like growing up, I don't know if his parents were diplomats or what exactly it was, but he lived around the world his whole life. And his kids have too. He's just moved to Australia from China and where he's lived. And we had a deep conversation about what it means to be a global citizen. And in particular, when are you home? And the question was, are you never home anywhere because you're always moving? Or are you home everywhere because you're always moving? It would be an interesting thing to explore with you and your family, which is, do you become a stranger everywhere or do you become a citizen everywhere?
I mean, I can speak firsthand about just our own family experience. There's two things that come to mind when you share that. The first is I remember last year we were in Theos, Greece, right, at one of our locations, and we'd set up there. I think we were probably a month and a half into that cohort, and the family and I ended up going to Tuscany. I had some meetings in Tuscany to launch the next location, so I decided to take the kids with us, and we were gone I think 4 days in beautiful Tuscany. And when we came back, I'll never forget it because it was super late at night. It was like 11:30. We got off the ferry, walked back up to our apartment. And the minute we like opened the door to our Greek apartment that we'd been in for a month and a half, my son, he like ran into the apartment, threw himself on the floor, and started kissing the floor. And he's like, ah, oh, it feels so good to be home. And I thought I just couldn't stop laughing because I was like, wow, like we were only here for a month and a half. And this 10-year-old boy had identified this little Greek island, this little apartment in this Greek island as home and feels that sensation deeply in his heart that, wow, I'm back home. That was such a magical moment for me because I was like, wow, that's powerful. Like he was born and raised in Montreal. His whole friends and cousins and community is here. But this small apartment in Greece all of a sudden felt like complete home to him. And I've had the exact same experience every time I go back to a boundless location that we've lived in. So we lived in, for instance, Sintra for the first 3 months, 6 months when we launched. And when we went back to Sintra, whenever I go back to Sintra, the minute I just drive into the town, I feel like I'm home. I'm in this small Portuguese town, but I run right away my kids will run straight to the gelato lady, the Portuguese old woman that they became best friends with. And like, she's their grandmother and like running back to, oh, that was the house we stayed. Like everything becomes so familiar and it feels like home because I think that's the big difference is when you're traveling doesn't give you the sensation like you have a home. But when you're slow traveling or you're living like a local in a location, even it's for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, that those elements where you're like going to buy groceries, you're cooking at home, your kids are going to school, you're going to work in that location, that makes you're not on vacation, you're not a tourist anymore, you're more of a local. And I think that difference between regular travel and slow travel and living like a local really gives you the sensation like you have multiple homes. Anytime that we return to any of the locations that we've lived in, it feels like we're going back home. And I think that's such a beautiful experience for anyone to have, to sense that feeling of warmth and welcome and home in different parts of the world that you almost have no affiliation to. I'm Canadian, born and raised in Quebec, Montreal, and I'm of Indian descent. So I'm Indian, but I feel right at home in a small town in Portugal or right at home on an island in Greece or in a small Tuscan village. I think that's a really beautiful life transforming experience to take with you on the journey.
I have a few closing questions that I ask everybody, and you've kind of answered the first one. But toward the end of every episode, I ask, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
I mean, I would say it's fulfillment, and serving. For me, it's a job that makes me feel like I'm having an impact on the world and serving the greater good. For me, that is what gives me fulfillment, at the end of the day, is knowing that I've been of service to others in the world.
What does it cost you?
A lot. I mean, sleep. I mean, we work a lot. It definitely, sometimes I see the families that are living the boundless life and how beautiful of an experience it is. And I don't know if I get that full experience myself because although we're on location, it's a very different experience for me, because we're running so much and building and it's just constantly on the go, and on work. You're kind of living, breathing your work, even on location, off location. It's just very long days. So I think it does take a toll sometimes on your health and your mental capacity. I think I was a very mindful mom. Like I really made the effort to be one of the reasons I pulled my kids out of school is I wanted to be fully present there for them and live every day like it was our last. Sometimes I miss being that present with them or being fully there because I honestly feel like Boundless is my third baby, to be honest. And I'm often required to be fully, or not required, want to be fully present with this baby as well to give all the kids that I actually look at in our community as my full presence. So sometimes it does come at the expense of my own family, I would say, in all transparency and honesty. And it's a juggle that I do constantly, but all worth it, I think, at the end of the day.
Last question, I think, which is, which of your sites has the best food?
That's a hard one. Oh my God. Tuscany had some amazing food. I think Tuscany.
I had a bet placed on Tuscany. Yeah. I did.
I think Tuscany is where I had to buy a few new pants to be able to finish off the cohort in the comfortable attire, to be honest. I would say, yes, the pizza and the pasta and definitely hit the waist, but totally worth it.
Where can people learn more about you and Boundless Life?
Yeah, you can learn about Boundless Life at our website. It's www.boundless.life. You can follow us we're on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a good way to find me, Rehka Magon. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Dart. Nice to speak with you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.